I'm going to talk to you about the most common problems I see with beginning saxophonists and some really easy solutions, hopefully. When you're dealing with tone problems and it seems like they have a generally well-formed embouchure, they're holding the instrument properly, and if something's not right, the first thing you should check is the reed. Chances are the reed that comes with the instrument, whether it's a rental or a beginner level instrument, should probably be just thrown away and never used. You need a reed that is strong enough to require a firm embouchure and good amount of air. When reeds are soft, they just encourage really poor development of embouchure and tone. The reed brand that I specifically recommend for all of my students, and it's not an endorsement by me, but just simply because of the quality of the reed, is a Van Doren Blue Box, just the traditional Van Doren. It's a traditional cut Van Doren Blue Box. You're probably, with most beginners, going to use a 2 or a 2.5. The important thing to understand about reeds is when you start venturing away in different brands, the strengths vary dramatically depending on the style of the cut and what country it was made in. American reeds tend to be softer, French reeds tend to be harder, although there's variations within those that it is a really confusing world. That's why, especially for folks that aren't really familiar with reeds, I just recommend the traditional Van Doren Blue Box, 2 or 2.5. Most professional players play, after having played the instrument for many years, usually play a 3 or 3.5. So you can see that if you've got your student on a 2.5 from the very beginning, that's a good strong reed for a beginner. It's going to require them to use a lot of air, and that's really the direction I think that a lot of saxophonists go wrong early on, is playing that really terrible reed that comes free with the instrument that you've purchased. They're usually incredibly soft and not a good reed. Along with the kind of reed, one of the most easily sort of messed up things on a saxophone is the placement of the reed on the mouthpiece. If you hear a sound, if they've got a good reed and everything looks generally right, but it just seems like a really strange sound, a really thin, tepid, buzzy, out of tune sound, incredibly out of tune, which we'll talk more about tuning later, but something that just seems wrong with it, you will be sure to want to check the location of the reed. And that's simply, when I'm talking about the location of the reed, obviously left and right. I'm going to try to hold this so we can see it on the camera. It needs to be centered, but then what I'm talking about is up and down. I've seen beginning students all the time with their reeds down nearly that far. The reed should be, if it's a good reed, the reed should be essentially even with the top of the mouthpiece, about like that. If it's a reed that's just slightly soft, but still a generally good reed, I have my students, you can oftentimes get several more weeks out of a reed if you just push it up a very slight amount above the tip of the mouthpiece. This is going to be difficult for you to see, but I'm talking about probably less than a 1/16 of an inch above the mouthpiece. If the reed's too hard, you just reverse that and you would push it down ever so slightly. I'm going to try to show this for you. I've exaggerated this so you can maybe see what I'm talking about. But the location of the reed, more often than not, is something that can cause huge problems. If it's down too far, this way, it plays too soft. If it's up too far this way, it plays entirely too hard. So really, reed is the first thing I look to. If everything just generally looks okay with a student, I'm looking at the reed immediately to see if it's a good reed, hard enough, and in the right position. Those are things you really want to check. Obviously, along with the reed, we should talk about the mouthpiece. It's important on the saxophone, maybe more so than certainly any other woodwind instrument, and maybe even the brass instruments, is to have a mouthpiece that is built to play classical saxophone if you're having them play in a concert band. There are many examples of this as far as brands go. Selmer makes mouthpieces, Van Doren makes mouthpieces. There are hundreds of mouthpiece manufacturers that make a mouthpiece that will work in a classical saxophone setup. That's something you're going to insist upon your students having. There's nothing wrong with jazz mouthpieces. They're simply made for a different setting, and they're not particularly good mouthpieces to learn how to play the instrument on. So you really want to, in the beginning stages, have them on a, quote, classical mouthpieces that are gonna give them a great chance of success with this. Typically they're larger chambered, so that means the part of the mouthpiece inside it, in here, is larger chamber, and the tip opening is relatively small. You combine a large chamber with a relatively small tip opening. That's the distance between the reed and the tip of the mouthpiece, the tip that you actually blow into. The large chamber and the tip opening combined make what is typically known as a classical mouthpiece. Those aspects are going to allow your students to have a really strong foundation in forming the embouchure and learning how to play the instrument. And they're also going to allow your saxophonists to blend with the other instruments in a band in a way that allows them to be a part of what's going on. It's a pet peeve of mine when we go to band rooms and see students with lots of problems that are being exacerbated by the fact that because they're playing on the wrong mouthpiece or a bad reed, that their band directors are having them play softer. If you're constantly having to tell your saxophonist to play softer, it's not because they're playing too loud, it's because they've got a problem that allows them not to be able to play soft. So you want to address the problem, and your saxophonist will really be a huge bonus for your band, and they can contribute in a really useful way, like the other sections in the band. One of the other common problems we see with saxophonists that you should really learn how to deal with is the really small sound that is moving very little air, having a difficult time getting anything to work right on the instrument. The way I deal with that with students is I call it my siren exercise. And you simply take the mouthpiece off and blow on it. It's going to present the student with an incredible amount of back pressure, way more back pressure than they're used to getting when they've got the saxophone on. At first, they may not get any sound out, and that's okay. As they learn how to do this, they'll probably at first just be able to get a single pitch out. What you want to get them to do is sound like a siren. I'll just demonstrate that for you, and then we'll talk a little bit about what it's doing. And I'm simply changing that pitch just like I would be if I was whistling, is the analogy I use with students. If you get into complicated descriptions about what we do to change the pitch, it gets very complicated really quick, and it's something that nobody can see because it's inside your mouth. So you change the pitch like you're whistling. What this forces them to do is move their air faster and feel what it's like to have a little bit of back pressure against them. When they put the instrument back together and blow on it, they always get a better sound. There are specific pitches that really produce a lot of results, and really all I'll tell you about that is it's not too high and it's not too low. If you have a student that has an incredibly high pitch when they blow just on the mouthpiece, something like, you can hear the pinched sound, or that kind of thing, there's something wrong. They need to be somewhere, it should be a comfortable, nice sound, and it's almost always, I would say 95% of the time, it's too high. So if it's a really high squeaky sound, have them just relax everything and get it down. But the way to do that is to simply that siren exercise, which is up and down. I think if you listen, if you look at all these things we've talked about in the common problems and some of the solutions and really focus on that, you're going to really give your students a lot better chance of success in your band program.